the crisis that we faced during COVID-19 was magnified to the point of hysteria, to the point where they're counting people dying of all sorts of diseases and calling them COVID deaths and elevating the amount of people that died to the point where people are absolutely terrified of it. If they had applied a similar attention to this, I think we could at least put a dent in it. But in terms of what the DEA is doing, in terms of what law enforcement's doing, I mean, they need more resources. They need more help to try to stop this shit from coming in.
Well, they do. And are you familiar with a guy named Dimitri Christakis?
No.
He's a pediatric epidemiologist, and he really looks at the long run of pediatrics as they grow up and what affects them in later years, what happens early that affects them in later years. And he's a brilliant scientist. And he says what's happened with, he'd be a great, interesting guy for you to talk to. I've interviewed him 3 or 4 times. He says that what's happened with the handling of the pandemic is going to amount to millions of years of lives lost with these kids that are in school now. Millions of years of lives lost.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what he's talking about is that because of the educational gap that's been created by the pandemic, because of the social developmental gap that's been created, with the competitive gap that's been created, developmental, competitive, educational, that this generation is going to lag behind. And like, for example, if you're not reading on grade level at the end of the 3rd grade, your likelihood of dropping out is 4 times normal. And the reason for that is, with the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, you're learning to read. From the 4th grade on, you're reading to learn. So if you haven't learned to read in those first 3 years, you now don't have the tool to read to learn. And so you start falling further and further behind. And so your likelihood of throwing up your hands in frustration, falling further behind each year and ultimately dropping out. And if you're low socioeconomic or a minority, and your parents don't support education, et cetera, it's 6 times normal. But he's saying that these kids that got so little and lost so much in math, reading, and science during the pandemic with this remote learning, which was a disaster, that they're going to have less educational attainment, which means they're going to get lesser jobs. Lesser jobs are more dangerous jobs because they're more manual labor, they're doing construction work, things where you can get injured. They're going to have lesser insurance, and so you get less treatment, slower diagnosis, more injuries, and that as that, and other factors, but as that obtains, that will take years off their life at the end. They might develop cancer, but because they have poor insurance, it might be slower to get it diagnosed, lesser treatment, so it advances further and takes years off their life. They get injured, stress, trauma, and so it may take 2 years, 3 years, 4 years off of each kid's life. And we've got 57 million kids in the public school system right now.
I read something that confused me. Maybe you can help me with this. Because they were saying about Los Angeles, people were criticizing the response to the pandemic in terms of remote schooling and making kids wear masks. They were saying that math scores went up And I didn't understand how that could be possible. I haven't heard anything like that about any school system. And Los Angeles, which was particularly draconian in their response, they were trying to say that math scores went up.
Yeah,
Have you heard anything like that?
I have not.
Can you find something about that?
I just typed in Los Angeles math scores, and all I see is it's down.
Yeah, well, are people just lying?
Low math, reading test scores, but it's California, not Los Angeles specific, but it's lots of articles saying this.
Yeah.
Steep decline,
Yeah, that's
sharp
what
drop.
I thought. The people were arguing about this on Twitter because some pundit was talking about the response to the pandemic and how it affected school kids, and all the. Can I say peanut gallery? They were chiming in and they were saying that scores were actually Los Angeles scores were going up.
Yeah, I can't see anything that says that.
Results of California's first statewide test since COVID are. Click on that. LAist right there. Yeah. See what it says? Are back. Find out how your SoCal school fared. Oh, so it's just like individual schools.
Well, I've certainly not.
Well, that looks like a decline in every single chart.
Yeah, math results specific here is down.
Yeah, in every one of them, in every county, there's a decline, a very noticeable decline from 2019 to 2022. So what the fuck are these people talking about?
I'll check Twitter and see if I can find what they're talking about.
It might just be fucking propaganda. It's so dangerous what some of the gaslighting that you're seeing. I saw people